Welcome to Fire Engineering Radio and to our show, Pride and Ownership, the Love for the Job. I'm your host, Chief Rick Lasky. Just spent a weekend in Washington with the Snohomish Fire District up there. Well, it's actually a large fire district, but with Greg Osborne, with Grego and the group, and man, what an awesome day with the men. I know I say it all the time, what an awesome day doing Pride and Ownership with the men and women of that fire district. Just fired up. I leave there, you're tired at the end of the day after doing that all day, but man, you're fired up when you get around folks like that. And that's all over the country. And the day before was in Glendale, Arizona with the women in the fire service. They've combined both groups, the chief officers and the women in the fire service. And, I was telling my staff this morning at a staff meeting that the energy, you walk into that place, first of all, that is an incredible organization. I've said that before. If you're a female firefighter and you do not belong to that association, shame on you. You need to get hooked up with them because they are awesome. I just, with Cheryl Horvath and Erica Nelson and Carol and the group, and you've got Catherine Ridnour in there. There's just so many wonderful folks, but the energy, it's just, to sit there in the evening at the reception and then the day, the things they've got going on, the projects, the stuff, it's just, you can just feel it. You can walk in there and feel the energy with all the great things they're doing for the fire service. I've made a decision. We're gonna get my newest good friend from the Los Angeles City Fire Department, one of their captains who recruits for them on. I want to have her explain how she was able to recruit two of the Olympic softball players to become, and actually another pro player, three of them to become Los Angeles City firefighters. What a coup! What an incredible thing if you're recruiting. So, great organization, wonderful things. They gave me a extra large T-shirt for my new little sister Eileen Brennan, for her, and Chief Tom Brennan's daughter, for her and her family. We're, like I said before, we're taking care of them. The one thing she said she misses, besides obviously missing her father greatly, is the fact that when he'd come home from teaching, he always tossed her a T-shirt. And as goofy as it sounds, you know how that can be. And we're going to try and keep Tom coming home a little bit there with a T-shirt every now and then. So you can send those to me if you want, extra larges, and we'll make sure, Peter and I will make sure we get them to her. But other than that, hey, today's show, we've been getting a lot of great feedback, like we do about all the shows, about having Chief Tom Freeman on here talking about company officers. I've been bombarded with emails about that. But we've actually had people doing homework projects for both their fire department and college classes as to what was covered when we had Professor Glenn Corbett. Glenny was on, and we got into notable events and terminology and just the traditions of the fire service, and big conversation this weekend about it. Had a young man walk up to me with a pad of paper with all these things written on it. He says, when you and Chief Corbett were talking about this and talking about that, and just good stuff. When we promised to bring Glenn back, and what we're going to try and do is break down some of the segments into some different types of historical incidents or fires. We're going to do one section on maybe theater fires. We're going to do one on maybe the great fires, Great Chicago Fire, Boston, some of the other ones. We want to talk about some schools. And today, what we want to probably jump off, I think is appropriate, everything going on this summer, we just made through this winter, is to talk about places of public assembly, some of the social clubs and some of the disasters that happen out there, and what happened, how they happened, and where we're going, and how far we've come since then. So our very, very special guest today is Glenn Corbett, technical editor for fire engineering, professor at John Jay College, a member of the Waldwick, New Jersey Fire Department. Glenny, welcome back, buddy.
Thanks, Rick. Good to be here.
I know I sing your praises all the time, buddy, because you're just incredible, and you're my buddy and my brother, and I love you. But pal, I'm telling you, it was so cool, Glenn, to be sitting there in Washington. Snohomish is about 30, 45 minutes north of Seattle. And to have this young firefighter walk in at break time, and I'm expecting him, to ask questions about what I just covered on the slides, and he wants to talk about what we talked about on the show, and I was just grinning from ear to ear. I know you've gotten some requests. Hey, tell real quick before we get going, tell us what you did with the community page to kick things going with tradition there.
Well, Rick, I basically added another group there called Tradition, and it's basically to focus on the historical events, the specifics of our fire service history, basically. And as I think the way to best describe it is that tradition is sort of the glue that holds pride and ownership together. So I wanted to get an area on the website because you and I both get a lot of emails about, specific things and dates and procedures and equipment and what have you. So I thought let's have something out there that we can debate those or put the information out there, and so guys can all see it rather than just going through individual emails and things like that. So.
Well, I think that's awesome. I think it's going to generate a lot of good talk, if anything, and it always, like anything else, it takes a little while to get the word out. I think they're up to, what was it, 2,300 yesterday or whatever. That site just keeps growing and growing.
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
Just wonderful, wonderful stuff. Well, hey,
by the way,
buddy.
I believe that Fire Engineering just sent out a email request to everybody they had in their email list. So keep an eye out for that for the listeners in case they aren't on there, Rick, on the community website now and everything. Just keep an eye out for an invitation from FE itself. So.
Well, and it's easy to do, isn't it, Glenn?
Right.
What does a firefighter have to do to get signed up? I know I mentioned it once before. What all did you have to do? What kind of hoops did you have to jump through as Glenn Corbett to set up a group there? How hard was it?
Well, certainly to get the first thing, of course, is to sign up for the website. So
is that difficult?
No. You can go through the main web page on Fire Engineering and do it that way. And then once you're in there, basically, you can kind of go whatever direction you want to go in. I mean, if you want to, want to just participate or just want to read, certainly that's one thing. Just read what's going on there. Or if you want to participate, you can jump in at any group that's on there. And I think, I don't know, there's maybe 30 groups in there right now. I'm not sure.
There may be 1,000. And you know what? Each one of them is pretty. I mean, there's some pretty cool groups in there.
Yeah.
Anthony Avillo, did you see his? He's got one on quotes.
Right.
But you think, all right, we're gonna have a group on quotes, and Anthony, I mean, there's some great stuff going back and forth there.
Right. No, definitely. That's what I say. And the thing is, it's sort of it is an open community in that anybody who's in there has the opportunity to create their own group or do whatever they want to do. Basically, I think the only guidelines were that and this is important to Bobby Holton, the editor of the magazine, that we want to make sure that we know who we're communicating with. So. The goal is that we need people's real names and real photos on there. So,
and I know he's tried to get that word out, Glenn. You're right, because what they don't want is firefighter Bubba 204 or whatever.
Right. Because we want an open and honest discussion here, and we want to know who people are, so we understand their perspective, perhaps on things and that kind of thing. So,
well, and it's important, and just to keep things, I know that, a couple people, I think, had the wrong idea about the site that are not firefighters posting dating services, and I know those were removed right away, and that stuff kind of happens, but the word needs to get out there. Just don't do firefighter 204. Put your name down. For some of you, be a grown-up. For the rest of you, just remember what we're trying to do at the site, and put your name down so when you're up there, we know who it is. I haven't read anything inappropriate yet. I'm sure if there was something on there, Peter and Bobby are going to zing it right away, but I haven't. It's firefighters talking with firefighters, and pretty much, you're going to get an opinion or two and be ready for that. And it may not be what you want to hear, but it's been awesome. So, all right, Glennie, hey, let's get on this, buddy.
Okay.
I've been waiting for this, pal. We wanted to talk about it. One of the last 4 times we started out wanting to do one show, and we ended up with 4, and it was all incredible. But let's talk about some of these tragic fires. Some of these.
Sure.
So and starting, I'm gonna let you wind up and go with which ones you want to talk about, Glennie, and maybe we could cover some of the causes and later on finish with some of the actions that have happened because everybody saw the video. I mean, can you imagine if we had video footage of some of these other ones you could talk about, like we did the station social club, some of the actions we could have taken.
Oh, certainly, and that was such an unusual thing, and. We'll probably, why don't we go in chronological order, maybe? And,
I want to, brother.
And I think because we'll kind of wrap up with the station. I think that's. Most people are very familiar with that, but maybe we could bring up a few extra points there that people may not be aware of and everything. So, but we talk about places of public assembly. These are defined in our building code basically as places people gather for a variety of purposes. It could be to drink and have fun. It could be for a church service. It could be to wait for a train, for example. These are all considered to be places of public assembly. And as you can imagine, the safety requirements are more extensive for those, because you essentially have a large audience, or a large group, I should say a large group of people who could be exposed to a single incident simultaneously. That you have large open areas and things like that. So,
now, and I'm going to ask you a question, because I know we're going to actually talk about it differently just because there's so many of them.
Yeah.
But and again, just for some folks, some of the young firefighters out there that aren't necessarily into the codes yet, man, would a theater, would a movie theater, the opera house, those kinds of facilities, would that fall under that definition?
Yes, yeah, that's what I say. The place of public assembly includes everything, common things, say, like theaters, like nightclubs, like auditoriums and schools. Even again, passenger terminals are in that category. Basically, you said any place where people gather, come together for a specific purpose, as a group. I think that's the key.
Okay. All right.
And so, we talk about it from a regulatory standpoint. This is the category in which we apply these rules, basically. So, they're treated differently, for example, than like a business or an office building or something like that. So,
okay.
So as we go through here, so we talk about the history, which we really want to focus on today. You'll see how things, in some cases, did change, and in some cases didn't change, or did change and nobody knew about it or followed it, basically.
Well, and Glenn, one of the things that my good friend, you've met him, you met Tom. I tell the story of you and Tom sitting in the back seat of my buggy when Diane Feldman and I were in the front back in 2000 when you guys were in here for the conference, the Chiefs Conference in Dallas. But Tom, the same thing when it came to the schools. He was pretty frustrated with some of the things going on when you see the taxes and funds and everything else being generated by some of the school districts and how they're supposed to be used for means of egress and for different things, and we're using it for artwork and for painting lockers and things like that. And he got a little lippy, got a little out there, but it generated some action though too. But
right, no, exactly. And you think. And that's another, when we talk about schools and things, that's a whole other category, probably for another show. And
another day, yeah.
But that's very dynamic right now, too, because of all the issues with, shooters and things like that within the schools and stuff. There's tremendous shift change right now in fire safety and things when it comes to the interface with those kind of problems and things. So,
well, and they're letting us into the schools. They were very protective before, I know here,
right?
And with letting us in there to even get my Terry McGrath, my bomb and arson chief, with his bomb dog Retha,
right?
And now, unfortunately, due to some very bad things that went on, they're opening up their doors to us.
Right, and I think we've sort of turning the corner on that issue, and because like I said, it's unfortunate that like here in New Jersey, actually, that there was sort of a knee-jerk reaction to this situation. And fortunately, there's been some people here in New Jersey that, fire-wise, that have really stepped forward and been able to, to really get an understanding of what the needs are for the law enforcement community, but also understand that there are fire safety needs as well simultaneously.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. But schools, we got plenty of things to talk about schools for another program. But for today, we'll sort of focus on these places of public assembly. And why don't we start at the very beginning? This is a funny story, Rick. A lot of guys that are probably listening to this think that the NFPA is the end-all for all information about fire safety and what have you. And this is one that actually I maybe caught them with their pants down one day, actually.
Well,
I went on their website and I found that they were actually missing, a particular place of assembly fire which occurred actually in 1811, probably one of the earliest large fires in a place of public assembly here in the United States. And our friends from Richmond, Virginia, home of the Quint. I guess the East Coast home of the Quint, right?
Right. Yeah.
We'll leave that debate to another day. But
there you go.
But our friends in Richmond probably know very well that the Richmond Theater actually burned in 1811, the day after Christmas in 1811, and killed 72 people. But again, probably from a notable standpoint, it was the first real, place of assembly fire here in the United States on a large scale, basically. Some actually elected officials were killed in this fire. I mean, it was quite something. But again, it probably the most important thing is this probably it would be considered our first fire. And funny thing was that when I was on the NFPA's website, I noticed that they gave the top 10 list of fires again in Police Public Assembly, and it wasn't on the list. So I contacted them, and God bless them, they actually did put it on the list.
Well, and Glenn, do you think some of that, though, not to jump off topic here, is what we've talked about all along, that we're not, you know, when generations change, when people retire, move on, is sometimes in the shuffle, we're not sharing the info, like what we're trying to do now. We're not sharing the information.
Right, and that's why programs like this and the Traditions web group on the community webpage, and most importantly is just within individual departments across the country about talking about these things, you know, and knowing about these things, and really playing a role, you know, of being a mentor to younger people and transferring that information to them, and because again, a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, and you see it, Rick, I'm sure on your group as well, that people post things and say how disappointed they are because, you know, they don't really have a sense of the history or their traditions within their department and things. So
and they're missing out. And I have to say something real quick. If you hear some banging going on here, Glennie, and there's a little bit of pride and ownership going on here. The guys are washing the windows at the station as we speak because we're holding the pipes and drums and honor guard symposium this week. They want the firehouse to look good. But anyway.
Well, that's pride and ownership right there, cleaning the windows, right?
It is. But yeah, you know what? Getting the information out there, having the information available, and it's there, especially now with the Internet. Oh, my goodness. If you can't find some of this information, but you got to know it's there in the first place.
Right, exactly. And so, like I said, even though today we're talking about big fires that had really had a national impact, I mean, there's a lot of fires in every community, I'm sure, that have had tremendous local impact, you know, and so it's important, I think, that, you know, that especially the senior members, but even the younger guys and stuff, really look into these issues and really understand what happened, and then, again, pass that information on to the next guy, you know, because, like I said, that's what holds us together is tradition, as we say, the glue that holds pride and ownership together.
Well, go ahead, bud.
But, you know, if we look in the 19th century here in the United States, you know, everybody kind of thinks when we think about famous fires, we think of conflagrations. I mean, the era of conflagrations probably comes from the point right after the Civil War, right up to about 1910, 1920. There were earlier fires, certainly in New York in 1835, and in 45 there was a fire in Pittsburgh. But if you want to say the bulk of the conflagrations occurred, you know, pretty much right after the Civil War, starting with Chicago, of course, then Boston, and probably finishing out toward the end there with Baltimore in 1904. That's what most people think about in terms of big fires and things. But there were also a significant number of theater fires that occurred over the years. Probably the next big one after that one in Richmond we just talked about was the Conway's Theater fire in Brooklyn, which occurred in 1876. Interesting things there, you know, for little tidbits of information here and everything. But that was a situation where the actors on the stage actually attempted to play a role in calming the audience down and trying to you know, to get them out safely. And unfortunately, that didn't happen for a lot of people, basically, because the fire spread very, very quickly from the stage out into the audience, basically, and killed a few hundred people. So,
and what did they try to do? I mean,
well,
just
as far as the audience, as far as the actors go.
Yeah.
Well, they basically, you know, they understood, you know, the gravity of the situation, basically, and tried to encourage people to move swiftly, but, you know, not to, of course, the famous word panic here, which has a technical definition and some, you know, for a lot of people in the fire science field of things, but, you know, tried to make sure that the people got out quickly. The problem is that even with that, you know, effort on their part to try to move people out swiftly, unfortunately, it wasn't fast enough. That's the problem. And people, you know, of course, people don't realize, I mean, we do, and the fire service understand it, but a lot of people, you know, that aren't in the fire service don't understand the speed at which fire can move. I mean, we see that later on with the MGM fire in 1980, where, you know, there were a large number of people that were, of course, killed in the towers there, but in the high-rise towers, but there were a significant number of people killed in the casino because the fire moved so quickly through that area. So, again, you see this over and over again. We'll talk a little bit later on about Southgate, Kentucky in 1977, about the Beverly Hills Supper Club.
Right.
And, if you look 100 years between those two events, you see the same kind of thing happening where, in the case of the Beverly Hills Supper Club, a young busboy actually went up onto the stage and, again, told people to start moving toward the exits and things like that, and tried to put a calming voice out there. But, of course, again, not everybody made it out of that fire as well. So you'll see some common elements, like I said, as we go through each one of these here. So 1876, the Brooklyn Theater fire there. It was called Conway's Theater on December 5th. That was a landmark fire. It was right after the creation of the paid fire department in Brooklyn and New York. Actually, they were separate departments at the time, but not too many years after the creation of that. We move in. There are other fires, of smaller theater fires over the years, but probably the next biggest one, of course, is in your old neck of the woods, and you know which one I'm talking about, right, Rick?
Right.
The Iroquois Theater fire in Chicago. In 1903, right before New Year's, December 30th. As a matter of fact, the irony of that particular fire was the fact that this building was sold, I guess as in the other cases, sold as a fireproof building. We all know that that's of course not.
It didn't work for the McCormick Place building either. So
in Chicago as well.
And none of the proofs work. Fireproof, waterproof.
Right. No, that's why I say I always could change. My students, of course, know never to use the word proof anywhere. Fireproof. Matter of fact, this is a funny thing, Rick, that our friends, if there's some listening from New York City Fire Department, the ones that I've been talking to recently, I've told them that their terminology of fireproof and non-fireproof no longer exists in the building code anymore. So they're going to have to change their terminology. So because fireproof is such a bad term to use because people have different impressions of what that means. But of course, you can have a fireproof building and then kill a lot of people, and that's exactly what happened in Chicago,
right?
In the Iroquois Theater fire. Today, it still stands as our largest loss of life in a theater. 602 people killed. Again, this is a building that was brand new, was thought to actually have had all the latest in fire safety features. Didn't have sprinklers, but it was thought to have adequate egress. It did have vents over the stage, which is a current requirement in our code today. Unfortunately, what they found out later on after the fire was they were still nailed shut, so they never opened, basically.
Oh, jeez.
And a variety of other safety features. Unfortunately, they weren't adequate, though. And that's why. I'm kind of fast forwarding here, but that's why sprinklers play such a critical role. We realized, even after that fire, that we need something that responds very, very quickly. And so we talk about the Iroquois Theater. This was a major landmark event. As a matter of fact, here's a name from the past. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Rick, but you ever heard the name John Freeman at all? Does that ring a bell with you?
No.
Okay, well, John Freeman, if anyone has ever done estimates of nozzle flows, through smoothbore nozzles and that kind of thing, it looked at charts, basically. It said, for a given amount of pressure at the nozzle and nozzle size and everything, that there's a certain amount of flow in terms of GPM coming out of that on a chart, basically. Well, John Freeman was the guy who did a lot of those studies back, probably at this point 100 years ago, basically.
Okay.
But John Freeman actually came in after the Iroquois Theater fire and actually did a study of it and everything. So he wrote a book about it, actually. So that's another thing we should talk about, books here, Rick, right?
Well, I was going to ask you a little bit later. Jump on it now, buddy. I know where you're going with it.
Okay.
I think it's awesome.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to say that guys who want to learn more about these fires, we're kind of just touching each one of them, but there's a lot of really interesting information out there about at least some of these fires. Certainly the books we've talked about before, Heritage of Flames, for the very earliest history of fire in America, Romance of Firefighting, and then, of course, Fire in America, which is a NFPA publication. Those three books probably have the best general information about fire history and fire service history and things. There are others out there as well, but we're talking about theaters today. Some of these fires have been written up. As a matter of fact, there's a book called The Tinderbox about the Iroquois Theater fire. That's a particularly good one because of the anniversary, of course, in 1903, basically. and actually the anniversary that we just had in 2003 for that
Okay.
fire. The Beverly Hills Supper Club, which we'll talk about in a little while, is another one that actually I've read. There's a couple books on it. One which is still in print called Inside the Beverly Hills Supper Club. That's a good one. That's more of a human interest angle on it, although it does give you a first-person account of the guy actually was there that night and takes you through the history. An excellent, excellent book. There's a new one I just picked up. Actually, it's not a new one, Rick. It's an old one. It's out of print right now. But for those guys who are really interested in sort of the technical angle and especially the legal issues that came out of the Beverly Hills Supper Club, there's a book called Beverly Hills, The Anatomy of a Nightclub Fire by Lawson, Lawson, out of print. I just got a copy of it myself a few weeks ago.
You know what, real quick, jump in there. We mentioned it before. Tell them how they get these books.
Oh, okay. Some of these books are available at abe.com, it's actually the organization is called American Book Exchange, so it's just literally just abe.com. And you can go on there, and it's a gigantic website for used books and out-of-print books all over the country, basically, and you can connect. And I know some of the guys on the website, the Fire Engineering Community website, Rick, have asked me about different books, and they've already actually gone there and purchased some of them. So most of these books that we're talking about, the three big ones, Romance of Firefighting, Fire in America by Lyons from the NFPA, Lyons, and Heritage of Flames by Don Cannon. Those three books they're on the AVE website. There's still a bunch of copies out there. Most of them you can get them for under $20 a piece. That's less than what they originally cost in some cases.
And Glennie, I found that it costs you more to ship some of them.
Right.
Unless you want one in mint condition.
Right.
They're there. They're at the musters, but to get them from Abe,
right?
The ones that you've told me about that I've ordered, which I thank you so much because we have copies in each firehouse now. We have a historical cabinet, if you will.
Sure.
It cost me like $3 or $4 for one time. It was more to ship it, but man, it was worth it.
Oh yeah, and as I say, if you're interested in learning more about these are all excellent books basically to have. So. And again, some of these places of assembly have been written up. There are several books about the Coconut Grove, which we'll talk about. So most of these fires, as a matter of fact, most of them, I guess, correspond sort of to the anniversaries as well. So as these anniversaries come up, keep an eye out because a lot of times people will write books about them and everything. So,
well, I'm gonna get you right now. I'm gonna get you to commit to if we don't get through.
Yeah.
Some of these today.
Yes.
And I know you're willing to come back on and do some of the schools and some of those. Would we be able to do would you be willing to do a part two if we can't get through? I know, and we want everybody to know. Glenn mentioned already that this was not intended to go through every detail.
Right.
I mean, there's some research on the folks that we want, but we want to talk about them. But if for some reason we don't, I'd love to get you back, buddy. If I can get you right now.
Certainly, anytime, Rick. We'll do that.
Outstanding.
But
go ahead, buddy.
Let's run through a couple more here. Our friends in Boyertown, Pennsylvania, of course, just only literally a few months ago had the anniversary for the Rhodes Opera House fire, January 12th, 1908. So the anniversary was just a few months ago.
And you went to...
actually, I was out there for their Historical Society had a weekend of events, and I went to a presentation on the fire, basically. Really interesting, really great people out there in the local Historical Society. Have a nice display on the fire, basically. It was actually this particular fire killed 170 people, basically, on the second floor of an opera house. And I think as a matter of fact, this past issue of the current issue of Fire Engineering, I threw a photo in there, and as you know, I have a column called The Professor on there about building construction issues, and I made it a habit of each issue that they have the column in the magazine. I actually include at least one image from an old fire, a real old fire typically, to kind of bring the historical perspective and why certain things are done a certain way. So, for example, in Boyertown, this is a situation where a play was being given, a religious play actually, and during an intermission, they're actually projecting what they were called magic lanterns back in that 100 years ago. So, Rick, for you and I and some of the older guys on here, we know slide projectors. Nobody even knows what slide projectors are anymore, right? Okay. Well, this was even older than that. This was the predecessor of the slide projector, where they'd actually have glass plate images, and they would put them in a machine that had very bright light, and you'll see why here in a second why that was a problem, but would project this image on the wall, and so people, at that time, 100 years ago, had never been to Egypt, had never been to these exotic places around the world, has seen unusual incidents and things they read about in newspaper. This is, of course, before telephones and before a lot of things. So when they saw these were really very interesting things, people wanted to see these. Well, they actually used the grandfather, the slide projector, again called this magic lantern or stereopticon machine. And basically, the stereopticon machine, believe it or not, actually mixed hydrogen and oxygen together to create a very luminescent flame, basically, inside this machine. And, of course, as you can imagine, what happened here, there was a leak of the hydrogen. As a matter of fact, some of the attendees at this event noticed this blue flame that shot across the ceiling, basically, which is very consistent, of course, with hydrogen since it has no carbon in it. It almost burns almost without any flame at all, but if you can see it, it's typically a very light blue flame. Anyway, this fire basically, of course, started from the leak in this particular machine, and and of course subsequently caught all the scenery on fire and things like that, and just was a literally disaster that unfortunately unfolded in just a few minutes. So, as a matter of fact, in this particular case, it's interesting to note that actually a firefighter on his way to the fire, a volunteer firefighter on his way to the fire, actually was killed when the steam engine he was with actually went off the road and ran into a tree on the way to this fire. So it was quite bad. They had to rely on other fire departments to come in, and it literally was a disaster, basically. Especially Boyertown, even today, is a very small town, a small community outside Reading, Pennsylvania, in the eastern PA. I guess the next big one, which this is one that not a lot of people are aware of and everything, is all the way down in Natchez, Mississippi. In 1940, there was a fire, and it was called the Rhythm Club, which was a predominantly African American club at the time. It was basically a tin building, metal frame building, with metal exterior siding on it. And, as we see in a lot of these fires, Rick, especially even later on, we see how interior finish plays a role. And, of course, interior finish is anything you apply to the walls. So, that could be, in the case of the Night Station nightclub fire, polyurethane foam rubber on the wall, basically. But in the case of this particular fire in Natchez, Mississippi, it was actually Spanish moss that they had hanging all over the place that really spread the fire very quickly.
And do you find, what I find interesting, Glenn, is I know where I go, and I do it, but when you sit with a group of firefighters, as soon as you sit down, I did it when I was in Washington this week. We sat down at this pub to have dinner and some tea, and first I do is I'm looking up at the ceiling, I'm looking around, looking for the means of egress, I'm looking at what they have on the walls going, you sit down even now and you go, man, if this place went off, I mean, look at what they've got on the walls here, the ceilings.
Yep, exactly, and that's what happened here, is interior finish in this particular fire played a big role. And again, this is April of 1940, and over 200 people actually were killed in this particular fire. So it's one that has not, to my knowledge, ever been written up, to any great extent. There's no book about it, certainly. There are some reports the NFPA did back then. Of course, Fire Engineering had a report on it. But this is one that's sort of gone under the radar screen. So if there's any budding historians, especially down, that part of the country and everything along our southern coast, if someone's interested in really delving into the history of this fire, this is one I think that's really waiting for someone to write its history, basically, at this point.
Okay.
So, then, of course, we get into the 1940s, and perhaps one of the more famous ones. But before we get to the Coconut Grove, let's talk about Hartford, Connecticut. Weren't you up there recently, Rick?
Just there. Just there doing a program for the Connecticut State Fire Academy. Great folks.
Okay. July 6, 1944. Very hot weekend. That summer, as a matter of fact, I know because I love history of other things as well, and there was a particular amusement park here in my neck of the woods that burned down that summer. That summer apparently was one of the worst on record as far as heat and lack of rain and just being very, very dry, basically. Well, that summer, July 6th, 1944, in Hartford, Connecticut, a fire broke out in Ringling Brothers' Barnum and Bailey circus tent. which some of your listeners, Rick, probably have seen photographs of Emmett Kelly, the famous clown, running with a bucket of water.
Right. Well, there's actually, I think, a little bit of film footage.
Yes,
from that that either is
you can download
or somewhere. Yeah.
This is now we're into an age where recording is we can actually see a lot more, certainly, and like you said, film footage of that particular fire. There is a book on this one called The Circus Fire. Very, very interesting book, especially given the fact that again, I think one of the things that some of your listeners might be interested in is to see how, not just about the fire, but what happened after the fire, like what things changed after the fire. What were the legal implications? Were people held accountable for this and stuff?
Right. Well, and that one, interesting enough, because you got me, I talk about these in all the classes, given the, obviously I just touch on them, but
sure.
When I talk about when the circus or carnival comes to town,
right?
And these are the things, Glenn, you and I've talked about that. A lot of our young firefighters, and I admire you for just wanting to get folks back to, because this is the start of everything. You can't be good at what we do if you don't understand where it all came from. We both said that for years. But when the circus comes to town, or the carnival, and they set up in your mall parking lot or your local park or wherever it's at, the reason there are codes that some of us feel are a pain in the ass, that we have to go out and inspect and check and all that stuff, is because of these disasters. And one of the things, what were they doing? What were they treating the Big Top with that added to the, I'll just say it, fuel to the fire?
Basically, the tents are made out of canvas, as you would imagine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, tents today are actually synthetic materials, but back then they were canvas, which actually is probably better from a fire standpoint than the synthetics, of course, that we...
Right.
But the thing was with synthetics is that they rot, basically. With canvas is that it rots. And so they actually were treating the canvas, and it hasn't been established completely whether it was just kerosene or actually kerosene and gasoline, okay, on these tents, basically, just to prevent them from rotting, basically. Because, a circus would move from town to town, and they'd have to take the tent down. If it was wet and stuff, they'd be folding, just like the old tarps, remember years ago, right?
Yeah.
Or you and I would put tarps on engines and things, or old cotton jacketed hose, the same problem, right? That you put it away wet and you run the risk of basically mold and deterioration things. So anyway, they were treated with that. And of course, a fire basically broke out in the tent. Just again, of course, given the fact that it's soaked in these liquids, basically, the fire just took off at an exponential rate, and
you're not talking 15 people sitting there that can get up, head for an exit,
right,
and get their way out. We're talking a lot of people and something that they treated as waterproof to keep from rotting and everything else. With for the most part with gasoline.
Right, exactly. 168 people died up there, and it was really, just a real quick sidelight, Rick. I teach an online class at John Jay in codes and things like that, and several years ago, I was fortunate in that, even with an online class, that you can actually have a live chat on there. The student and all the faculty can log in at the same time. You have this running scroll of text spaces. People punch questions in and type questions in. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, I came across a Brooklyn College professor who teaches within the same system that John Jay is in within the City and University of New York, who, as a child, as a 7 or 8 year old child, was actually in the tent the day of the fire, basically.
Wow.
And so it was really interesting for the students actually to be able to ask him questions about what he remembered about the fire and stuff, and actually a person that was actually there. And I think for your listeners, Rick, who are interested, again, what we're talking about here, and really would like to pursue this at the local level and stuff where they work, that is one of the most important things you can do, is actually talk to people that actually were there. Not only firefighters, but also talk to people that were, civilians and things that were in a particular fire there, because they'll give you a lot of a different perspective on things, about what they saw and what they felt and that kind of thing, and record that, Rick. That's the most important thing, is for people to record that information.
And you're right, because if we don't, once those people are gone, that information's gone with them.
Right, exactly. And you'll never get it back again.
Oh, so, never.
And that's why I say, and unfortunately, a lot of that stuff is literally lost to history. 1942, right up the line there in Boston, of course,
Massachusetts. We know a lot of people have heard about the Coconut Grove. Well, that's was a nightclub in Boston, and of course, again, this particular fire has been debated for quite some time, exactly how it started. We do know that, of course, there were significant, as with all these fires, significant egress issues, the ability for people to get out of the building or whatever. But interior finish played a role here as well in this particular fire. There is, again, still a debate exactly how it started, because even with the Hartford fire we just talked about and stuff, there were accusations that someone had set the fire. There were other accusations that there were people smoking in the restroom that was attached to the tent. I mean, there's all sorts of different beliefs on how they started. Well, this is not unlike the Coconut Grove as well, because again, people have come up to various conclusions. Some, I think probably more likely than others, basically. But when we talk about the Coconut Grove, that is the largest nightclub fire in American history, even much larger than the Station Club nightclub that we'll talk about here in a second. But one of the big things, of course, as we said before, was with egress. The fact that large numbers of people were unable to get out very quickly. I mean, and you read this, Rick. I mean, this is just unbelievable. Every time, I'm reading this book about the Beverly Hills Supper Club. There's at least 4 fires now, Rick, that I've read where people have mentioned that after the fire was put out, that they actually went into the building and unfortunately found victims that were still sitting in their chairs waiting to get out. Okay? Yeah. Or not even waiting to get out. Never got up even to get out, basically. We see that with the Happy Land Social Club fire that was mentioned. I just read about in the Beverly Hills Supper Club here. We saw a similar thing with the Coconut Grove. And it's eerie when you read these histories and stuff where you see the same thing over and over again,
It is. And what have we said? In order to see what's going to happen next, we've got to look back at where it already happened, because history is going to repeat itself. Sadly enough, it's going to.
And as a matter of fact, yeah, that's exactly true. And that's why we try to learn from these things. So, for example, in the Beverly Hills the Coconut Grove fire, one of the big things that came out of there, of course, was the fact that the building used revolving doors, basically, okay?
Okay.
And we know nowadays that, and I think probably most of your listeners know that, those are not acceptable for means of egress. You cannot use those as exits for the building under emergency circumstances. So if you notice, any modern building that has revolving doors always has regular doors right next to it.
On each side, usually on each side of it, yeah.
Right. Because even though the fact that these revolving doors will collapse, they'll actually fold together under pressure, basically. You can't use them as a means of egress, basically. The codes will not allow that, just like they don't allow escalators and things like that. So that's one of the legacies of the Coconut Grove, is that when you see a revolving door in a building that's got a regular door right next to it, basically, you know that they actually came out of the Beverly Hills Supper Club.
And Coconut Grove, and how many? I mean, you got to throw that number.
Oh, yeah, of course, I didn't mention. Yeah, 492 people.
492 people.
Right, packed into that club. And those are there were even more people, of course, in the building at the time of the fire. Those are the ones who didn't, unfortunately, get out, basically.
And not to add any more drama to it, but for the first responders, for the firefighters and the like, respond to this. All these incidents we're talking about right now were long before critical incident stress management and being able to deal with. We have some folks, and understandably so, because it's not normal to see dead people and to see people burned up. And even in our business, there's firefighters go entire career without seeing that.
Right.
And God bless you. But could you imagine? I mean, 492, let alone 100-something in Hartford, and they were. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And I guess I look at it differently now, Glenn, like you do it. Having been a chief yourself, when you think about your guys and their well-being and their physically and mentally, and then to think about going through that, 492 people, wow.
Exactly, and that's, like I say, it's just mind-boggling, and to think that, like I said, that all these things happen, by the way, in a very, very short period of time too. Just like we'll wrap up here in a minute with the Station nightclub fire. But if you look at the history of these fires, these are not fires that went on for hours. I mean, these are fires that relatively were extinguished fairly quickly, I mean, for the most part.
I mean, the building's still, I mean, the roof's still, I mean, most of these, some of these are to the ground, but I mean, the earlier ones, but some of these are,
Right.
The building's still up. It's not like we went defensive and
Right.
aerial ladders up everywhere. Quick, boom, bang, and
right. Yeah, and as I say, and the thing is that the fatalities all occurred within a relatively short period of time, less than 10 minutes, basically. So, and this is something, that's consistent with each one of these fires, basically. The last two I want to talk about are the Beverly Hills Supper Club, which actually, Rick, as you know, we were at FDIC a few weeks ago, and I said, I've got to go up there. Being the historian that I am, I said, I've got to go to this site to see, what it looks like today, basically. So I rented a car from Indianapolis and drove up to Southgate, Kentucky, and went into the parking lot at the base of this hill where the fire occurred. And there's a nice brand new plaque, actually. It was just put up last year for the 30th anniversary of this particular fire at the Beverly Hills Supper Club, which occurred in 1977. It was a club that had been around for a very long period of time. Actually, had been a lot of gambling actually had been going on in the building, but by the 1970s, it was they called the showplace of the nation, and a lot of the really famous people, actors and entertainers, I should say, of the time period, actually went through this club. And on that particular night, in May of '77, John Davidson, who Rick and you and I remember him,
right.
A lot of the young guys,
big teeth, good hair.
Yes, good hair. That's what he's known for, his hair, I guess. But anyway, so he was actually going to perform that night, basically. And this particular fire, as I say, it's been written up in a couple books. I'm about halfway through this book by Lawson on it, which is really very, very interesting. Because again, you cannot believe how many things could have changed. As we know with any disaster, it's a series of linked chains, a series of links in a chain, right? That all these things line up, and then you get your disaster. Well, there's so many opportunities here with the Beverly Hills Supper Club for things to be different, and unfortunately, it didn't happen. Unlicensed architects being used, lack of inspections, just people essentially, unfortunately, the ball getting dropped at a lot of places along the way.
These are all facts. This is not somebody making up a story.
Right.
These are things proven.
Right.
Facts that, things were just not done the way they should be.
Exactly. And this particular fire, like I said, was really, really, really interesting because it has a lot of different angles to it. I mean, besides the issue, of course, of it being such a large number of fatalities, 165 people died in this fire. There were issues of course, of overcrowding, lack of number of exits, basically, no sprinklers, of course, again, but also interesting issues. This is a time when some of you guys who, again, Rick, you and I remember this, but in the early 1970s and in through the 1970s, the price of copper was skyrocketing, and there was a national push to move away from copper wiring, for example, that we've come to use for a really long time and still use today. But back then, there was a push to actually using aluminum wiring. So people actually used, instead of copper wires, aluminum wires. And I know that was a particular issue that was brought up in this fire as well. Interior finish, again, played a critical role here. As a matter of fact, this was probably one of the first. This particular fire is interesting in the standpoint it was one of the first real recognitions, I think, my own guess at this, but one of the first real recognitions of the dangers of synthetic materials like plastics and things from a toxicity standpoint. But also, we know that this fire was the first major tort action, basically a class action lawsuit against a variety of defendants, including, of course, the building owners in the state of Kentucky and some other entities. So this was up until that point, this was the largest, essentially, class action lawsuit that had occurred in American history at that point. So, but this, like I said, this fire, again, as I mentioned earlier in the program, was a situation where a young busboy, 18 years old, basically, took it upon himself because he realized he could see what was going on. He actually had gone by what was called the zebra room, was where the fire started above the ceiling and the wiring, and then essentially went all the way down to what was called the cabaret room, which was where Davidson was going to perform. There was a comic act going on at the time, and he actually just went up on the stage. He got the microphone, and he very calmly explained to people that there was a fire in the building. They need to leave, you know. And as again, Rick, every time you see this over and over again, some people took him seriously, other people didn't. Basically, they didn't react quickly enough. And I think, you know, to wrap up here, when we talk about the Station nightclub fire, which just about everybody who's listening probably is very familiar with. As you pointed out earlier, Rick, this is an unbelievable situation to have a videotape of this particular fire. I mean, this is just unheard of. Rick, I think we got to point out the reason why that fire was the fire ended up being videotaped was the fact that one of the owners was involved as a reporter or worked for one of the local TV stations in Providence, Rhode Island, and actually he was actually a part owner of the building with his other brother, I guess, and basically brought the TV cameras over to show how safe his club was, because just weeks earlier there was a fatal incident in Chicago at the E2 club in which a large number of people were killed. I think it was 21, Rick, is that right? I think 21 people, 22 people were killed in essentially a crowd crush when somebody sprayed pepper spray inside this club, and people tried to get out, and they ended up going down a set of stairs, which, of course, when they got to the bottom of the stairs, and this is one I didn't mention earlier, but, of course, one of the big things in Old Place Assembly is doors have to swing in the direction of egress to get out of the building. And, of course, these doors did not at the E2 club, and a lot of people piled up behind them. That's another thing, and that's probably one of the most, unfortunately, Rick, I forgot to mention, probably one of the most important things is that we've learned from Place of Assembly the doors have to swing out.
Have to go out. They have to give.
Right, and then, of course, we know the other big thing, of course, is panic hardware or fire exit hardware, which is basically the device, those push pads on the doors, which allow people just to push on it and the door will open, basically, will unlatch and open. So, but the Rhode Island nightclub fire, like I said, was one that's been studied quite a bit. For those of you who are really interested in it, there's no book at this point that, to my knowledge, has been written about it, but what's interesting about the fire was that it was, in fact, studied by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. If you want to go to the NIST, www.nist.gov, I believe is their website, and search for the Building and Fire Research Laboratory, and in there you'll find a report that they did on that particular fire, and they actually did a computer model of the fire, in addition, and matched it up with the videotape, of course, that we've seen. And they actually did what's interesting, of course, and this is probably how we got to finish this program off, is talking about what improvements were made. But
and Glennie, real quick, and I know you meant the valuable information you get from just looking at all these, and we're hoping everybody really does some research with this. There's so many things from that video footage, as tragic as that fire was, the fire behavior, how fast things went the way they did, how fast, I mean, you literally sat and watched how fast, from the time he realized what was going on and worked his way to the door. 90 seconds. And Glennie, when you go to the right, he ran to the right, he got outside, came back, bam, the door was, that fast, things were plugged up.
Right. Matter of fact, that door that you see on the videotape, when he runs out, sort of you see the front of the club, and then he runs around the side, that side door that he looks in, that's actually the door by the platform where the band was performing. So that door was a means of egress, and we subsequently found out that there were accusations made that someone in the club actually was preventing people from leaving that door. It was only for the band to leave, basically, and there was some that was brought up actually during the victim statement portion of the trial that occurred last year and everything. So, like I said, when you see that is, Rick, that whole thing was 90 seconds from the time the first fire started to the time they had flashover inside. And so it just, and if you notice, again, people watch that video clip, you'll notice that there's not instant recognition that there's a problem in the building either. A lot of people the band's still playing, people are still, dancing and stuff like that, but you notice the cameraman understood the problem because his camera immediately starts to move back to the club.
Yeah, he knew, and everybody else saw it was part of the show, or just whatever. And then, but
some people recognized it, and I think that's. I'm reading about the same thing in the Beverly Hills Supper Club. You see that people who hesitated and didn't, this is a human behavior issue here.
Well, do you think part of that too? And I'm going to throw this out there. I'm not by no means against people that partake and enjoy the evening and have alcohol, but
Well, of course, alcohol plays a role here too.
I mean, it did maybe in the circus, fire
Sure.
in Hartford,
Sure.
but in most of these, you're enjoying the evening. You've got people, maybe partaking or whatever, and
Right.
and all that. And but I'm telling you, I know I'm going back to again the dramatic. I mean, to watch that and see how fast that all unfolded.
Right.
Now, because when you sit here and you look at the books, Glenn, you look at the stories, you go, all right, now how did it? I'm sorry, but
Right.
with all those doors, with windows, people. So you see all the TV shows. All right, how did it? Oh my goodness! When you watch that, you go, now it all makes sense. You can
Right.
see how fast things get plugged up and how people can't get out.
Right, and again, it's eerie when you read these histories of all these fires, and you see the same thing happen over and over again. Beverly
Well, what
Hills.
are we doing?
People who, unfortunately, one guy even mentioned, I'm just reading right now, one guy mentioned a woman fell down in front of him, and he figured that he better pick her up and carry her out, because if he didn't do that, number one, she'd get trampled, basically, and number two is that it would stop people from being able to get out, basically, and that's
Right.
exactly what I think you see that over again when, unfortunately, when one person is trying to get out, basically, and they fall down, that is when there's a domino effect of other people, basically fall down on top of that person. That's where you get that unbelievable situation where you literally get like cordwood in the doorway.
Yes.
And and they look at it and say, just pull those people out. It is. I'm sure if we ask the West Warwick firefighters and stuff, that is not the easiest thing to do. Okay, no. They're literally. It's very difficult to pull people off of a pile like that, and I think it's just an unbelievable situation that occurs in a very short period of time. And that's why I say the poor West Warwick Fire Department there. I mean, there wasn't. You saw that when they pulled up there. What were they going to do? There was nothing they could do with that fire.
And they got there. This was not a 20-minute delayed response. They were. I mean, that's the one thing that we as firefighters we forget, and the civilians. Oh, it took you. It always takes us 20 minutes. When you seem like 20 minutes. Well, it actually wasn't 20 minutes. Let's look at the time from the first phone call. Dispatch, wheels up. We're rolling on our way, pulling up. They were there actually pretty quick.
They were there very quickly, and as I say, what were they going to do? The only people that they potentially could have gotten out at that point were the ones at the very front door, and as I say, it was very difficult to get them out. So even those, and then of course there were the bulk of the people were behind them, basically. In the club.
Very, 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 very bad. And
so, I mean, so what positive things come out of this?
What are we doing?
Well, like I said, I think as far as the Station nightclub goes, I think everybody may be aware that the sprinkler requirements, for example, for nightclubs, used to be 300 occupant load. That's the number of people calculated by the building code as being, permissible. You see those cards on the wall. It says it can be occupied so many people. That's a specific number that's determined, through a calculation, basically. That number used to be 300 for nightclubs before triggered sprinklers. That number has now dropped to 100.
Wow,
okay?
Good.
Nationally. Now, the key thing here is, Rick, and this is unfortunately.
But now that's new building or
that's new building, and this is the unfortunate thing, Rick, is that Rhode Island, of course, and Massachusetts took it a step further to deal with existing clubs and things like that. Okay, where they're requiring retrofitting of sprinklers and things like that. That whole issue. This is another American legacy because we don't have a national building code in the sense that every state uses the same code. It's a federal approach to it and everything. Is that, unfortunately, just like here in New Jersey, I mean, we're not talking about school fires and things today, but there was a bad fire several years ago at Seton Hall University in a dormitory where some students were killed in a fire, basically. New Jersey passed a retroactive law to require sprinklers in all dormitories in the state of New Jersey, okay? That law was not followed for the bulk of the rest of the country, okay? Just like the same thing for retroactive for nightclubs to really to incorporate, again, sprinklers perhaps in existing buildings and things like that. Those requirements were not adopted for the bulk of the country, basically. It only was within the sphere of the area in which it occurred, So that's the unfortunate legacy, Rick, is that on the bad side, that sometimes we do get positive code change, but again, those typically apply to new buildings, not existing.
Well, and some of our biggest problems, Glennie, are the older buildings.
Exactly.
How they were constructed and what's already on the walls.
Yeah, and you can imagine even in Rhode Island, I've been reading where of course, they're now in the point now that the fire's been a few years ago since the Station nightclub fire, that even the nightclub owners, the existing clubs and everything are are basically not wanting to do a lot of these things now because, again, the push, the emphasis on safety and stuff has unfortunately, as human nature is, it kind of dies away after a while. So
well, we forget
that's it.
The sharpness, the hurt, it kind of goes away, and then we have another. It's a fire service. We lose a bunch of firefighters in a fire, and then big deal. The magazines, the videos, the stories. And it's just kind of after about 4 or 5 years, and it happens again, and we're like, why aren't we going to change this? And
right, exactly. And that's, Rick. Unfortunately, that's the downside to a lot of these disasters is that that a lot of cases are just history repeating itself, just in a different place and a different time. But we did get, like I said, we did get some positive things. We point out a bunch of them, for place assembly, doors swinging out. We do have sprinklers in a lot of situations, not every place assembly, but the bulk of them basically. Some standpipe issues for theaters and things like that.
Some people are posting, fire watch where they have to actually hire somebody from the fire department or for fire prevention to stand there and either man an extinguisher or be observant, conscious, sober, everything else that plays into that, where at least, someone who's trained to recognize some of these things and but a lot of it. Real quick, I got to ask you a question, or do you just ask you to comment on it?
Yeah,
it's a lot of this too, and unfortunately, is the political end of things, trying to get stuff done with.
Oh, sure.
Dealing with politics, where how many times has that interfered with something good happening or something preventative?
No, exactly, and that's unfortunate, Rick. And the thing I learned a long time ago is, unfortunately, literally, you have to move on to make positive changes very soon after the disaster. It's just it's unfortunate. It's I've come to term it riding the wave of hysteria, because you have to do that, because I could see that as time. I've seen this over and over again. As time wears on, there's less and less attention paid to that particular issue. So you sort of really have to, if something bad happens, unfortunately, you really do have to, and I don't want to say use the word capitalize, but you really essentially have to do that, because it is so hard to keep people's attention on these kind of issues, and especially, as you just pointed out, especially the political side of things, because they're the ones, these are the politicians here, all the complaints, because just about everything we do, not exactly everything, Rick, but just about everything we do has a dollar sign attached to it.
Oh, absolutely.
So, but like I said, positive changes, place assembly, doors swinging out. Again, the sprinkler and standpipe issues. One of the big ones, of course, is interior finish. Those are the locations where it's most heavily regulated. And usually I tell my students tell them if it looks dangerous, it probably is. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's something that unfortunately gets missed in some cases in these place assembly. That if you see carpeting on the wall or anything other than wallpaper or paint, basically, you should be looking into it, basically.
Well, and this is the thing where, we go to a lot of incidents, a lot of EMS runs in places, heart attacks, fell down, bumped my head, sprained my ankle, all these calls, and we look at them as sometimes as a pain in your sector C, to be politically correct.
Sure.
When you're standing there and you're waiting to load somebody in a cot, or your medics are taking care of things, take a look around. If you're the company officer, the guys, this is your chance. We're inside these buildings. You look and go, okay, if we were going to lead out in here, how many turns, or what do we have on the walls or ceilings?
Sure.
I believe later on we'll get probably to another show, is Mike Spalding from Indianapolis Athletic Club fire.
Sure.
Like the bar where that all started, they had the same kind of problems with stuff, the way the walls were set up and different things. And here's your chance. It's like CO detector calls. We're in private dwellings. What a chance to look around. Well, when you're in these clubs or these places of public assembly, take a look and look at the doors. Look at the take a look around and see if this happened, if this went bad, how would people get out? But what would I do if I was first in here?
Right, exactly. And that's why I say you've got to, don't rely just on the Fire Prevention Bureau to take care of these things. You guys, the eyes and ears out there, when you're going to an EMS call or to a false alarm or whatever, that's the time to look around and think. If you see something, like I say nowadays, see something, say something, basically,
Well, in most of these places, even though they have a bouncer or somebody charging admission or whatever, some of them are counting. Some of them, they either don't have the staff or it's not on their radar screen. They're like, when it fills up, it fills up. That's a good night. We're making money. And I don't think they're awful people and wanting to see bad things happen. They're trying to make a living, but at the same time, you're out making a run on a Friday night, and you see cars parked on curbs and up in lawns and everything else around a particular place. You may want to stop and just poke your head in and go, "Oh, we better get the marshal here or something because this is bad." Yeah,
exactly. But can I throw a quick commercial in,
sure.
Rick?
Go ahead, buddy. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Something I'm thinking about for next year's FDIC is potentially a hot workshop, but a traveling hot workshop on the road with Rick and Glenn, perhaps. I don't know, but actually maybe taking a trip up to Cincinnati and to Southgate to see the site of the Beverly Hills Supper Club, perhaps to go over to the Cincinnati Fire Museum and perhaps meet with some of the people that were there that night, and talk about some of the issues, some of the code issues and some of the firefighting issues and some of the, the life safety issues. So that's why I'm thinking about that. So I'm going to post some stuff on the Traditions group page of the community site, Fire Engineering Community site, to get a kind of a sense of people think that might be something might like to do. We're not going to do it every year, but I thought this might be the time to do it, and so I'll put that together. So
I think that would be awesome. And it's you talked early on about how fire chiefs back in the olden days,
right,
like in Boston, would take a ride to Chicago to learn what they could from the Great Chicago Fire.
Exactly.
Only to have the same thing happen by them and like we said, it's not in the budget kind of stuff. But
right.
You had a progressive chief trying to take care of business back then.
Sure.
Same thing. It's never too old. It's never too late to go and learn about something,
sure,
especially a tragedy, and why we do what we do today, why
exactly.
we respond, why we have fire drills in schools. We're going to get later into why we have mercaptan and gas and natural gas and propane, and
right.
why all these things happen that sometimes are not the glamour or the exciting part of the fire service. When it comes to codes, when it comes to pre-planning, it's hard to get the guys out to pre-plan and do
right.
inspections.
Right.
I'm telling you, it's if you have the right frame of mind, the right attitude, if you're really into the job, you'll realize, like Jack McCasker said, you got to be a good firefighter. You have to understand building construction, fire behavior.
Right.
You have to know what the building's going to do with the firefighter's going to do with the building if you're going to be good at it. But
right.
pre-planning, Glennie, inspections, stopping, walking, you're out there, you're about, all this stuff could have a dramatic impact on you know what, if you ever have to go through something like you've seen
right.
in some of these places, God bless you, I think it's wonderful, but
right.
you're going to be haunted for a long time if you know you could have done something, or you could
right.
have taken that part of the job
right.
a little bit more seriously. Don't you agree?
Exactly. Learn the lessons of the past, and because they're going to come up again in the future because it happens all the time. So,
well, I'm hoping we can generate some talk with, and we're definitely. I mean, we're going to do these probably with Glenn for the folks out there listening. Probably maybe once a month or so. We're going to hit about every 4 weeks to get the good professor on and just talk about these things. And that way, if you got that notebook going, you can just add another section each time. Because obviously and tragically and sadly enough, there's plenty of bad stuff to talk about. But what are we going to do with it as a service? How are we going to take this information that Glenn's sharing with us and the stuff that's out there already, internet, books, everything else, libraries, museums? What are we going to do as a fire service to make a change, to affect a change? NFPA, U.S. Fire Administration, NIST, NIST, all those great organizations, it's only as good as people take advantage of them, right, Glennie? I mean, that stuff's only going to sit there unless you're willing to take it and talk about that and get as fired up about
sure.
what happened and how we can change it.
Sure.
And I'm hoping we can get your community page, Tradition on Fire Engineering's website. Guys, if you're looking for information, because Glenn was he just barely touched on some of these. It's out there. It's in some of these books he talked about. It's Google it, Yahoo it, whatever you got to do. Go out there and search for this information. Take the time. I know you're busy. Take 10 minutes and read something.
Right.
And get into some of this stuff. You'll see the similarities that Glenn's been talking about from incident to incident. You'll see, everything will start to relate and make sense. And I think all of a sudden you're going to get that cold shiver in your spine like I did going, we've got some of these places right here.
Right.
We've got some of these places, and you're going to turn around and hurry up and go take a look and get out there and look at things. So,
exactly.
Glennie, as we close things out, because we're going to get you back on, buddy, I appreciate so much you coming back on, pal. What if you could sum this up with some advice for the firefighters and officers that are listening out there when it comes to places of public assembly, which is what we were hitting on.
Right.
What could we've talked about? What could they do if somebody says, "All right, Glenn, Chief, tell me,
right.
What all right, what do you want me to do now? You gave me this information.
Top
you got
5 things or something.
That's Give them a charge. What's your charge?
Well, certainly if you're a company officer or a firefighter and you're out doing routine inspections, or you're get called to a location, a place of public assembly, especially when it's fully occupied. One of the first things you do is find out what is the occupancy limits. That's number one. Find out what somewhere in that building. It should be in the room in which or rooms that we're talking about here. It has to be posted for everyone to see. So that occupant load basically is a fixed number of people, and so that's.
Glenn, how about they take it a step further? Let's do this, buddy. And I think that's an awesome point. Yeah. Hey, Lieutenant or Captain, get a hold of your fire prevention people. Look in your still district, your first response still district. Identify these places and go ask them.
Right.
Go ask.
Well, and the thing is, it's got to be in the club or the place of assembly as well. So if it's not there, then that's certainly you got a problem because you got to find out what it is. But certainly ask the Fire Prevention Bureau. What is the set occupant load for this building? And then, of course, when you go there, find out, does it look like that's the number of people in there? I mean, Rick, you and I could spend another day. We'll talk about how to do that and everything. There are ways, there's techniques you can use to try to figure that out. But basically, most people can get a sense of 40 versus 400 certainly, but you can usually get a sense of 200 versus 400. I mean, you can usually get a pretty good sense of that. So that's item number one. Item number two is, of course, are all the egress doors accessible to get out? There should never be a lock on any place of assembly door. Okay, that's a given. Okay, so you can't have thumb latches, no slide bolts, no nothing. Okay, the only thing that can be on there, other than the door itself, is panic hardware. Okay, which is basically again that push pad and thing. So if you see chains or anything like that, that's totally not acceptable. And believe me, I could just go probably anybody's city and find the back door, the other exit out the back of the room has a thumb latch on it, or a slide bolt or something on there. Okay?
Well, how about when you go to walk into a place and you pull on the left door instead of the right door and it's all locked up?
Exactly, totally not acceptable.
Not acceptable. And
by the way, that's the only door that's allowed to have that type of locking device on it, key lock. That you can lock it so the door's fixed and everything, is the front main entrance. That's the only one you can do that on. The rest of them, again, you can lock it from the outside, but you cannot lock it from the inside at all. You can't have a lock device on it at all.
Glennie, how about this? Don't let them, if you're looking around, pull curtains. A lot of people...
Right. So blocking of exits,
front of them.
all that kind of stuff, curtains, mirrors, or tables especially, and things like that, NG on that, okay? Interior finish, another one. You see things hang on the walls, anything other than essentially paint or wallpaper might be a problem, and probably is, okay? So that's the other kind of thing you want to look for. You're also looking for the fire protection, systems in the building. Of course, make sure your sprinkler systems are, functional and things. Of course, we all know how to do that. Is quickly just run into the, into the riser room. Make sure that the valve is open, okay, which just means that the stem is out on OS&Y valve, or it has another type of indicating valve, like a butterfly or something like that. It'll say that it's open. In any case, make sure that system is functional. Make sure, that that's the case. Of course, another big thing nowadays, of course, is smoking. We know that a lot of cities have passed smoking bans and things. So you want to make sure that that especially in those areas immediately adjacent to the place of assembly, the back rooms and things like that. A lot of times that's where we find people are smoking, especially workers and things like that. So you want to keep an eye out for that. What else, Rick?
Well, I think one of the other things, too, I tell my guys is look around the exits just outside, especially those that are not the main exit.
Right.
If there's a bunch of garbage, bags, pallets, crap piled there, where if for some reason that was, we've had a lot of
cars parked right up against the door, or snow. People forget that they got to plow the snow.
Exactly. Well. And I think you hit on it, too, and we both mentioned it, is get out and look. I'm sorry.
Right.
Just get out and look, do some inspections, drive around. You know what? If you heard this show, do this.
Right.
Get on your rig, get in your car, Chief, get in your buggy, go right around your first still district, and try to identify these places. And then I think from there you'll be hard pressed to not want to look at them any further.
Sure.
You know, you'll be looking into some details in that.
Sure.
Well, Glennie, I can't thank you enough, buddy.
Thanks for having me again, Rick.
Oh, pal, and this is going to be something I know, just due to the volume of requests we've been getting from some of the listeners to have you back. We've had Professor Glenn Corbett, John Jay College professor there, member of the Waldwick, New Jersey Fire Department, technical editor for fire engineering, my brother, my friend, and just an absolute incredible resource when it comes to codes, history, traditions. If you need to get a hold of Glenn, right now I thought this was excellent because we've always been doing email addresses. Go to the fire engineering community page, second tab over, I believe, on the top. Look at the group Tradition. What a great way to email them, to post things, to ask questions, to get into all this stuff we're talking about, and more. There's going to be more than just tragedies, but just what we're talking about today. What a great way to get a hold of him, Glenn. Again, I can't thank you enough, buddy.
Thanks, brother, and we'll tackle another topic in a few weeks.
No, I appreciate it, pal. We've been visiting with Glenn Corbett, our good friend. Folks, again, if you have an opportunity, take a look at this stuff and do some research and get into it. If you need to get a hold of Glenn, a great way to do it again is through that community page, Tradition on Fire Engineering's website. If you need me, you can do the same thing through Pride and Ownership, or just get a hold of me at rick@prideandownership.com. And like we always do, probably the most important message we could send at the end of each one of these shows is to end it with these very, very easy words to say, but very sometimes difficult to live by, but that is be safe.